Well, guys, I want to welcome you to our Overtime podcast, where we are taking Sunday's conversation further and deeper. And today I'm super excited because of who we have and the direction of the conversation we're going to go. But before we jump into that, one of our guests is Jordan Geist. And the reason he is a guest is because he delivered part 3 of the message. And I told him I thought it was the best part of the whole series. It was so good.
Well, that's sweet.
So, yeah. So Jordan, can you just do like a 2-minute recap just to bring up to speed our listeners, and then we'll kind of jump in and take this conversation further.
Yeah. So it was part 3 of a 3-part conversation. So it is a little bit hard to catch up to speed without the context of the first 2 that you delivered, which were amazing and fantastic as well. Yeah. But in the first 2 we talked about listening to the voice of God and what He says about us and our identity. And the reason we had to start there is because when you don't know who you are, it becomes impossible to sit with others. We're so easily offended or distracted or whatever it might be. We have to make our point heard, etc. And so focusing on that in the first 2, then in part 3, really we move the emphasis to listening to others really practically and what that looks like. So as a result of kind of what we talked about so far in the series, the idea was that not only are you made in the image of God, but so is everybody that you've ever been eyeball to eyeball with, or through a screen in this age or whatever it might be. And so that has huge implications just on how you even approach any conversation. Mm-hmm. And then we got really practical to say, well, now you're taking your cue from your Heavenly Father and He listens to you, which is a really interesting thing to think about, by the way, because He certainly doesn't listen to us because we're right on every issue, or because He's going to learn something from us or gain something from us, or, switch to our political party or whatever it might be. He just listens to us because He loves us and He wants a relationship with us. And so we talked through what that looks like and now how we start to model that to the people around us. So real specifically, we went through the 4 steps of empathy that Brene Brown talks about, perspective taking, getting on the other side of a conversation, and suspending your judgment up front, not judging right away, just listening, being in the conversation, and then ultimately connecting around an emotion. Not that you have to have gone through the exact same experience somebody else has in order to relate to a common emotion that you may have felt before, and what that can look like, and how that can really open up a lot of doors to our personal growth, to connecting with people, to connecting in our relationship with God, expanding our perspectives, etc. So, it was a fun, kind of conversation to start shift the focus on others this week. So.
Well, I loved it, and I think it was so helpful. And there's lots of challenging moments that I just sat back and went, "Wow, okay, I'll think about that." And am I willing to do that to be able to listen to others, even if they don't agree? And I thought that was great. Yeah. So, hey, thanks so much for being here. But you're not the only one here.
This is true.
And so I am excited you're here. I just don't want to miss that point. But I'm also very excited because we have Traci, Pirri.
Very good.
Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And so what's so fun is, today was the first day we've met, and I've got to hear a little bit about you and your story, and I'm so excited because of what you do professionally is going to be so helpful for this conversation we're going to have today. But before we jump into kind of what you do professionally, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay. I am a mom and a wife. I'm a therapist. I'm a business owner. I own a group practice in Round Rock. I'm a baseball mom. That takes up a lot of my time, baseball and softball.
Mm-hmm. Who's your favorite baseball team, like professional?
Well, I can't live in my house if I don't say the Yankees.
Oh, dear.
But to be honest with you, professional baseball makes me fall asleep. I love Little League, but I cannot stand professional. I literally have fallen asleep in the Yankee Stadium.
It's so long. How long is a game?
It's just too long. It's so slow, and there's commercial breaks. And
Sure.
I played baseball my whole life, and I can't watch it unless it's the playoffs. Okay. I struggle with it. So now I've said that publicly.
I watch a lot
of
baseball. But not by choice.
Sure. Yeah. So that's good. So, you're a mom, you're a therapist, you're a wife. And so tell us a little bit about your kids. How old are they?
They are 10 and 13, a boy and a girl. They're awesome. And, I can't say a bad thing about them in this moment.
Well, that's good. That's fantastic. So on the professional front, I know you just mentioned you're a therapist. So how long have you been doing that? What kind of got you into that as well?
Yeah. Well, so way back when, I was a middle child. And so middle children tend to want to make the peace. And so I kind of was groomed for this from a very young age. My parents were divorced and then ultimately remarried. So I kind of grew up with like trying to listen to both sides and wanting everybody to get along. And then I think like most people, I just kind of fell into it. So I just liked my psychology classes in college and got kind of interested in it, and then, kind of took one step into it. And I went the social work route, which gives you a lot of different options. You don't have to do clinical work, and definitely liked clinical work. I did child protective services for a couple of years.
Wow.
Which was...
That's got to be hard.
Yeah, it was the hardest and probably the best thing I've ever done because, I just grew up very privileged and didn't know a lot about the world. And I was right out of college, right out of my master's program and doing child protective services and telling people what to do with their kids. And I worked with mental health and sex abuse cases. So it was really high acuity and I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah. You were giving it your best shot, but gosh, that had to be so eye-opening.
I was way too high and mighty, so it knocked me off my little pedestal quite a bit, which was good, and taught me a lot about the world, and let me walk into a lot of people's homes that I would never have met, and let me see other ways of doing life, which made me value the way that I grew up, and also value other people's cultures and lives in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise experienced. So it was good and hard.
Yeah.
And I like what I do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. Like what currently is there an area that you're focused in?
Yeah.
Is it general?
No, we specialize in trauma. So I do a lot of work with PTSD. We specialize specifically with sexual trauma in my group practice. And so we work with kids, adults, parents, and partners, and we help them, we say, to heal and thrive.
Sure, yeah.
But the idea is that to get everybody, the entire family, the entire system, because you can't heal in a vacuum. You really need the relationships around you to also change and heal. If you're going to move from a place that's broken and where you feel like you're broken, and your story, your negative story about yourself, when you talk about the identity that you have, when you go through traumatic experiences, whether it's a huge one like a sexual trauma or it's smaller like a divorce or something like that, you develop these negative beliefs about yourself. And until you unhook that and unravel it and move through that pain, you can't really have the life that you really want, and you can't love people the way that you want. You can't have the love and connection that you need. And so we love it. We're able to take people from that place of kind of hurt and pain and distrust and be able, through the relationship and through some really good, tools that we've got, to be able to get them to a place where they're able to be happy and, love their lives and love the people around them. So.
That's so good.
Yeah.
And I love you do that. I love you do that. I'm just telling you, that's one of the most, I've said this like internally with our staff. I think you pastor people. In terms of like the actual definition of pastor from a biblical perspective, like that's what you're doing. Like you are walking alongside, you are reminding them who they are.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, through Christ, like this is who you are. And you're, listening to their stories. And what's so hard about what you do, and I've personally experienced this in with my counselor, is that, you got to go back. And you got to go to those really hard places that everything inside of you doesn't want to go back because of how painful it is.
Right.
And then, but once you go back and start to unhook the things that you were talking about, that's your way forward. That's how you begin to experience some freedom and healing and exactly what you do. And you're navigating that whole process. And so I just want to affirm like what you do and just like, thank you. Goodness. It's so helpful for people.
Well, it's just very meaningful work, and it does feel like a calling. It does feel like something that is a pleasure to be able to do, and again, I love what we do.
Yeah.
So it's fun. It's good work.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you again for doing that.
Thank you.
And I know part of what you're doing, and you do this every day, is you're listening.
Yeah.
You're constantly listening to people's stories. You're listening specifically it seems to me, at a deeper level, just in terms of they can tell you pretty much any story they want to tell you.
Right.
But you're hearing things in that story. And that's the point to go, how are you telling this story? You're at that level of listening, which is a skill, which is hard. And I'm sure over time, with a lot of those kind of humility pills that you talked about early on, that you've gotten in a place to listen a little bit more effectively, to actually hear what people are saying, even though they may not be saying it the right way or what have you. And so, that's our conversation today.
Yeah.
And, how to listen, and especially how to listen to people sometimes that, don't disagree with you, which is tough.
Well, it's a parallel process to the trauma piece that I was just talking about, moving from one negative story to a positive one, right? So what we are always looking for is what's the bridge, right? So the story is horrific. The feelings that come up from what happened. And so if you're in a negative, a tense conversation with someone, you're talking about politics and you're at each other's ends or whatever, the idea is to look for the bridge for how can we connect? How can we move to a place that's more positive, that where we can, be in a respectful position and just believe the best about each other. And so it feels like a very parallel process to learn how to listen to somebody as kind of the same skill that you need as a trauma therapist to be able to move somebody from believing they're a terrible person to believing that they are a good person and they're worthy and they just happen to go through a bad thing.
Yeah. That seems so hard. The way you just said that, I'm like, oh, it sounds great. But like the actual doing it, I'm like, wow.
Well, and I always tell people it is hard work, but a good trauma therapist knows how to calm that process down and do it little by little so that you can tolerate. You're looking for like a window of tolerance, right? And you're looking for being able to not be overwhelmed and not engaged. And so you just have to learn, kind of like have a remote control and turn the volume up or turn the volume down. And so that's that process. And I think that that's really helpful in listening too, when you can learn to do that as a parent or as a partner, to kind of keep an eye on the temperature of the conversation and be able to slow it down if you need to, so that you can get to a place that's a little cooler and more calm, or heat it up and engage a little bit more if you're disconnected on your phone or whatever.
That's awesome. So when it comes to listening, just in general, why do you think it's so difficult? Like, what are the things that, like the barriers that prevent us from listening, the things that get in the way of, like, what's in your experience, like, why is it so tough for us to do?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things is that negative beliefs, right? The negative stories that we start to believe about ourselves and about other people in the world. As we're going through life and we go through things and we don't do that unpacking, we can get stuck in those negative beliefs. And so then when that happens, it's kind of like a screen that you're looking through. And so somebody comes and they say this, and that's the story that you're looking at what they're saying through. And so if we're not aware of what our story is, and we're not able to be intentional about that, we're not able to understand that for ourselves, then we're just going to react to that story. And that may be completely not what the person intends. But I think the other thing is that they're coming with their story. And so a lot of times the way they communicate is through, what they're either putting on you or what they're putting on themselves, right? So I use this example. My teenage daughter we were coming home from a softball practice one day, and she was just furious at me. And she was just berating and belittling me is the only way I can describe it. Like the words coming, I was just
and she's how old again?
She's 13.
Yeah.
And I just was like the things that were coming out of her mouth. She wasn't cursing me out or anything like that, but she was not being nice. She was saying some very hurtful things to her mama.
That's never happened with my teenage sons.
Never.
They always say just wonderful things.
I know. Yeah. And so I chose to just sit. I was a little bit shocked, right? So I just was driving and breathing. and like reminding myself that children are a blessing and saying that to myself over and over again until it actually felt true.
Which is true.
Which
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah.
I mean, we're adopted parents. We tried very hard and very long to get our kids.
Wow.
So I remind myself of that when I'm very frustrated with them. And we got back, and I was like, I need a break, right? And so we went to our kind of separate corners, and she was trying to get her dad riled up against me, you know, which never works. Poor thing. But I had some time to kind of calm down. And then when I went back to it, I realized that, you know, I went back to her and I said, when you were saying all of those things, what did you mean? And finally we got down to, she was just trying to tell me she was mad at me and that she wanted me to basically not be so rigid about a rule, right? She wanted me to be a little bit more flexible. Well, that I can listen to.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I explained to her that she didn't say a single feeling word the entire time she was telling me how she felt. And so we work on, like, next time maybe you can say, Mom, when you don't let me get an ice cream cone, it makes me feel angry. And I wish that you would just be a little bit more flexible. And then I can hear that, and then we can talk about that, and it won't be this big thing. So we do a lot of redos and like practicing how to say the words in a way that people can hear a little bit better. But, you know, not everybody grows, poor thing, she grows up with a therapist.
I know, I was about to say. And a mom is a therapist, which is...
It's not good.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, she would tell you it's not good.
Yeah.
Because, you know, sometimes you don't want to be in a therapy session. But she, you know, as we do all of those things, it gets us a little bit closer to me being able to understand where she's coming from and me not reacting to the way that she was disrespecting me, because that's how it felt and that's actually what it was. But then we're able to go back and do a repair, and she's able to say she's sorry, and then she's much more willing to try my therapy skills to communicate better the next time.
That's so good.
Awesome.
And so if I heard you correct, in terms of like listening, part of the issue is actually not the conversation itself.
Right.
It's what you're bringing into the conversation and the story of you. And are you familiar with your story? Do you know your story?
Right.
And that feels like, you know, I've said before in terms of marriage, the same kind of thing. Like when I meet with couples and what have you, like I hear very few marriage issues. And the issue is actually what we brought into the marriage.
Right.
And it's the story, it's our childhood, it's what happened, some traumatic events. And those things seem to be triggered in the marriage or in a marriage, which then creates a lot of like tension in that marriage. But there are very few marriage issues, just what we bring into that. And the same thing would be true for listening.
Right.
There's like, in terms of the ability to listen, it has so much to do with what we're bringing into the conversation.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about as she was describing the stories. Like that's a little bit of what I was talking about on Sunday with Emily and I. That's been just one of the most game-changing, like night and day type things for us. Just realizing that we do bring our own stories to any one conversation, and how often we can literally be having two completely different conversations as a result. And if you never thought of that before, never heard of that before, if you never had, you know, any of your own counseling work done, I mean, that is a game-changing type paradigm. And for 5 years, I felt like we would be in the same cycle of like the same arguments, the same, like we've been here 100 times before. Like, how does this keep happening? And, you know, then we started to do some counseling, and it was like, wow, that concept is a game changer. And I love the marriage issues thing. I've heard Andy Stanley talk about how like marriage issues are like, do you use one tube of toothpaste or two? It's like, left side or right side of the bed. Like those are marriage issues. The other, everything else is just our personal stuff coming and colliding. And so it's really fascinating. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, one of the benefits. I've got a friend of mine who, he's like, Buck, every time you talk about counseling, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that's ridiculous. And it's fair because, like, before I got in counseling, like, honestly, that was my posture.
Sure.
And I was like, all you need is the Bible and Jesus. Like, that's it. And a little bit of prayer, you know, and it'll fix anything, you know. And I actually did a message about this to where I did everything I could, but yet I still had the same things that were going on. And there was an emotional piece of me, and I was, and I didn't know how to really process that. And I'm telling you, part of the beauty of counseling is beginning to know your story. It's like you can look in the mirror more clearly. What
you said was pretty true too. Like, it's all the emotional rush. So when you think that, when you're in a place where you're thinking someone is either reflecting back that negative story you have about yourself, or they are saying something that completely doesn't match with the person you want to be, right? So, like, my daughter was calling me all kinds of names, and it didn't match with, I work really hard to be a good mom. You know, I work really hard to listen, and so none of the stuff that she was saying matched with me, so I want to fight against that. And what happens is that you get this huge emotional rush through your body, and that, like, literally in your brain, it takes away your ability to make good decisions and to be able to, like, see differences, and you just get rushed in. And so all you can really go through is your own emotional experience, because your brain prioritizes the emotional management piece. So you have to learn how those skills of being able to turn that down, so that then this part of your brain can come back on, so you can have an objective, conversation with somebody and be able to understand where they're coming. So I talk about it kind of like it needs to be a split screen. So if you're having a conversation with somebody, it's going to be a good, helpful conversation if on one side of the screen you know your stuff that's coming up and you know what's important for you, but equally on the other side of the screen is what's coming up for them, and that both of them are positive. Right? So we're not in a negative place. If it's all me or if it's all that other person, we're not having a good conversation. It needs to be an equal split screen. And so you need to be able to either push pause or slow it down or take some deep breaths or figure out how to get your body into that place where it can come back online. The social engagement part of your body can come back online, and then you can have a good conversation with somebody.
That's so good. So let's play that out a little bit, because I think, one of the things that's kind of like, we'll laugh about is like the worst thing to talk about at a family gathering is like politics and religion and money and all these things. But in our culture, especially today, I mean, these are some of the things we've got to be talking about. And if we're not listening to one another, I honestly don't think we can move forward. I think we're just going to build our, little tribes, if you will, and just, keep fighting at one another.
Right.
And so, but the reality is there is an emotional rush. There are some traumatic things. There are things that are triggering these emotions, which then, as you're saying, that's all I can focus on. It's like I'm myopically focused on that one thing that you said, and I can't hear anything else.
Right.
So what are, like, if from just a family gathering, or if you're talking to your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, or what have you, and you feel that emotional rush, or you're talking to somebody about politics and they have a completely different view, or whatever it is, are there some practical things to do in that moment to go, like, I'm feeling this rush, I'm ready to explode?
Yeah.
What do I do?
So part of it might be using your body to access that piece, right? So you can take some deep breaths or do a grounding skill, like bring your attention to your feet and literally try and feel as much detail as you can for what it's like to connect to the ground. You can relax your body, do something along those lines. There will be people that I'll do like a goddess pose. I do a lot of yoga. So I'll have my poor clients. They're always getting up and moving around. But, this like getting down into your kind of sitting on your haunches kind of thing. All of these things are things that can help your body to settle back down and to shift out of that place where it's all emotional management. On the flip side of that is connecting to a positive identity piece that you have about yourself. So like in the message, connecting to that piece of I'm a child of God. And so whatever helps you to do that, whether it's reading the Bible or saying a prayer or what have you, it's those pieces can help you to kind of zoom out a little bit so that then you can say, oh, I've got too much of one side, this is a one-sided conversation going on in my body. And like today, I always get a little nervous when I talk, and so we were starting to get ready, and I could feel it, and it just rushes you, and you get really caught up in your head about like stupid stuff,
Sure.
like I'm gonna be licking my lips too much or something. I don't know, something stupid, right? Yeah. And so then you prayed, and that was one thing that helps me to just kind of get outside of myself and out of my body and reset. And so I was able to calm back down a little bit and able to, get into the conversation a little bit more and outside of myself. So you just have to try it out, and everybody's a little bit different, and you need at least, I would say, 5 to 10 different things to try.
Right.
You can go outside and look at the sun. You can, look at a fish tank, hold a rock. I mean, so these little bitty things, the point is you have to do something.
Right. Yeah, otherwise it just can lead to more pain or more brokenness or more frustration or more hurt or more emotion, because we say things out of that place, we do things out of that place, and that just is additive to the brokenness that's there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, all three of us are wearing a smartwatch here, but in counseling, we've talked about, you literally just see your heart rate go up. And, beyond this point, hey, we're not going to have a productive conversation anymore. How do we do some of the grounding techniques you talked about or whatever, find a minute of space, a recenter before we, get back in the engagement? Not to, avoid conflict or anything, but to say, at this point, we're what you talked about, we're all just in our emotion and can't have a productive conversation. I think it's so interesting, the physical side, too.
You know what's amazing? And I've shared this. I think I've shared this with you, Jordan. I think I've shared this before on Sunday, but with my dad, there, growing up in a home where he would want to get control, and the way he would get control is through volume, or through words and a selection of words that were really hurtful to my identity, and so before long, I was I was always walking on eggshells around him. And I was so nervous about saying the right thing. I have to say the right thing. I have to do the right thing. And if I don't do the right thing, he's going to explode. And emotionally, that felt pretty traumatic.
Sure.
And I remember as a 35-year-old man, when my mom was going through cancer, and this had happened multiple times before this, but there was a very distinct memory I had to where I'm sitting there on the other side of my dad. He's starting to get dramatic. And I'm like, Dad, this is the most inappropriate thing you could be doing right now in front of our family, in front of Mom, in front of all these. And so I started to lean in and just said, Dad, can we have a conversation? This is not okay. And immediately when I reflected that to him, he exploded. And in that moment, my chest got tight. My brain, just the ability to think and connect dots of thoughts. I didn't have that ability. I couldn't even complete a sentence.
Sure.
And the air, I had little to no air to even I could maybe get 4 or 5 words out, and then I had to take this massive breath. And I thought, here I am, a father of 5 sons. I've been married, 15 years at the time. And I'm a pastor, and I can't even talk to my father because of all the emotional and the beauty is that through being on the other side of my counselor for a long time, I remember the first time that I had the opposite experience, and it was here at Dos Salsas, and I was talking to my dad, and I was like, Dad, here's the deal, and I laid down some things that I had never said to my father, and reflected what it's like to be on the other side of him, and I was like, I have air. I have cognitive thoughts. I can complete sentences. And it was so empowering. And it just, there was really specific things I had to process, but also had to do in that moment that you were sharing.
Well, and you probably did a couple of things to help him out. So in that moment, was it the hospital room with your mom? And
it was at their house.
At their house, okay.
Yeah.
He was trying to get control, so that means he felt out of control. So he was already amped up, and you were going in and telling him what he should be doing, his son. So he probably felt a little, sandbagged. And so, boom, right? But my guess is that when you met him at Dos Salsas, you told him you needed to talk to him about something. And so he was already prepared. This is going to probably be a more difficult conversation. So he was in a different headspace. And probably you had been doing a lot of work with your therapist to be able to calm yourself down and stay in a place of, I'm okay, right? And then he didn't explode, and so your nervous system didn't go back to that time when you were a little kid and he exploded, and it was really scary because you didn't know what was going to happen. And so now both of y'all were able to stay calm. And as you're able to stay calm, his nervous system is able to stay a little bit more calm, and now we get somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's a great example of how something can shift.
Yeah.
That's why I almost interrupted you. I was like, it wasn't that you couldn't talk to your dad.
Yeah.
It was that you needed some skills. You needed to do some things different.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. And, even since then, I think that Dos Salsas conversation was, I don't know. Jordan, you may know better because I've shared quite a bit with you, but it was like maybe 5, 6 years, 7 years ago. And even over those 5 or 6 years, I mean, my dad is still my dad. He's still the same dude.
Yep.
And he will explode, and I can feel it. I can feel it go, whoo. And it wants to rush and just shut down the whole conversation where I can't listen to him. And even in the midst of that, just doing the work, you know, having some things that you just shared are so helpful to be able to remind myself of who I am, remind myself of who my dad is, you know, and be able to listen to him even when he's doing the stuff he's done for a long time.
Right.
And that just feels, it's really drawn us closer together in our relationship and allowed the parts that we can relate on, the good parts, you know, the ability to do that. So I love what you're saying.
Yay.
So let me ask, in terms of conflict, is there ever a point just to like cut the conversation off and just be like, I'm done? Like, you know, it's like we're going down this path. Okay, like I'm walking away.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there starts to get any posturing of violence, obviously, cut that off and get out of Dodge. We don't have to have conversations with violence. But I think that the other time that it's good to stop that is if you're in that place with that split screen where you are, it's all on one side or all on the other, and you can't get out of it, or you're so overwhelmed with emotion that you can't speak. So you're struggling to get out words, or you can't turn down the volume of your words. Then that's a good time for you to either slow it down or just say, let's take time out here, and we can come back and revisit it at a later time. But other than that, like with my, like for instance, the example with my daughter, you know, she was just going on and on and on, and she doesn't even remember the things that she was saying, and she would be mortified if she knew, like if I had a video recording, because she doesn't talk that way. She's a really beautiful girl, and she loves me, and I love her, and all of those things. She was coming from a place where the things that were coming out of her mouth were all kind of poisoned with the emotion that she was having, and this feeling that I didn't love her because I wasn't buying her an ice cream cone, right? Like that was the story, that, you know, I didn't love her enough, or you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
And so that's where that was coming from. So her going on about that, I didn't need to stop that. I didn't need to do anything about that. I could let her run her whole course out until I could understand where she was coming from. But the only way I was able to do that was by paying a lot of attention to what was coming up for me and keeping myself from responding until I really understood what was coming up for her. From a place that was of love. Right. You know, not what she was saying to me.
Yeah,
So.
Which is so good. And I think part of that is because of what you were talking about, Jordan, and I think what I talked about on part 2 is your security in who you are. Like you were able to sit in that space and absorb so much of that because of who you are, like your identity. And some of the things I've talked about are the whole idea that, hey, I'm radically loved by God. Everything outside of that's an illusion. And that's a great Brandon Manning quote from the book Abba's Child. You know, love that book, highly recommend it. But that's who you are in Christ, and that you're a new creation, that you're forgiven. Like everything has been paid for. The debt's been canceled. Quit trying to earn it. And the idea to go, I am a daughter of God. I am highly valued. You know, I'm a son of God. I have what it takes. Like I'm a daughter. I'm beautiful. And that I'm not alone. And that posture, I think oftentimes in our identity, gives us the ability to sit in a space that may be contentious, that may be hard or difficult, and be able to listen. So talk about that a little bit, because how much does the identity play in the ability to sit there and find the positive, find, you know, the common ground elements, be able to hear somebody when the volume's high or the emotion's high, and maybe they're at that place to where they're triggered, but you are at a place to go, hey, you know, how can I sit here or be here in a position to listen?
Right.
How much does the identity play in that? Are there other things that give us the ability just to do what you did with your daughter?
Yeah, no, I think it plays into it quite a bit. And I think that that's again where your own work comes through, whether it's spiritual work or in the therapy room or whatever, that you're able to see yourself outside of a situation, that you're able to see that, like, when we first started the conversation, you asked me to tell you a little bit about myself. And so I just started labeling some of the hats that I put on, some of the roles that I play. And that's part of my identity, but it's not the full picture. It's just one little snapshot. And so I think that when you are able to take yourself a little bit less seriously and kind of step back a little bit, it allows you to take other people less seriously. Like, I didn't need to take everything that she was saying seriously. I didn't need to take that to heart and let that get all the way through because, we're just people, and I knew that she was hurting. And I knew that as my role as a mom, even though she was telling me I was being a terrible mom, I knew that my role as a mom is to be able to listen and understand and help her through her hurting. So when you can come from a place where your identity is just grounded in something that's positive, and you can feel that all the way through, because, there's lots of times when I don't feel that in my body.
Right.
And I go into shame, or I do something that I don't like, or I'm in regret or whatever, and I feel it in my body. And you just got to learn to let that move through you and figure out what works for you to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of support. I didn't come to this place alone and in a vacuum. I had wonderful parents that I knew, even when they were arguing with themselves, they loved us. Most of the time they were arguing over how much time they spent with us. That and the spice rack, but that's a whole other story.
Oh dear. I'm sure that sounds like a story.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? I had really good parents. I had good friends growing up, and I've had really great mentors and support systems in my work as a therapist and as an adoptive mom. The birth family is a huge support for us. So we just, I've been blessed to have a lot of that. And if you're not blessed to just have it handed to you, you have to go and create it and find it for yourself. And so it's,
And when you say create it and find it, is that like through mentors? Is that through, maybe small group, or, meetup groups or small groups, and getting involved and starting to find friendships, starting to find maybe an older man or older woman, just to share life with and get some insight. And is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I think you have to be intentional about the people that you bring into your life, the media that you bring into your life, the things that you read. All of those things start to create your worldview. And so when you're really intentional about it, if you want to have a loving life and you can be intentional about bringing in the things that support that, that's when you're walking in that direction. And so, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question kind of similar in that vein because, we were talking about this a little bit offline. I didn't want to dive into this Sunday because I felt like if I did, we wouldn't have the time to unpack it and it would be said wrong and people would kind of use it as an excuse not to listen to somebody. But it's kind of almost around, I guess, like boundaries with listening. I was using with Buck, like there's a couple people in my life, Buck is in this category. Emily, my wife, is in this category of like, I'm pretty much going to act on anything they give to me in terms of feedback. Like, it's a huge red flag to me if I ignore something they reflect to me because they're in a special category in my life and have earned that trust, etc. But we've also, been on the side of plenty of people where, like, their unhealth is coming out. They're giving you unhealthy feedback, and if you were to, act on that, it actually could be harmful to you or to the relationship. And of course, we're all human, so our unhealth is always coming out. But do you have anything in terms of like who you let into shaping that, that kind of world, or what you were saying, being intentional about who those mentors, that kind of thing?
Yeah, doing trauma work, we come from, people get wounded by other people. And so we do a lot of work of how do you learn how to trust somebody, and a lot of that is that their actions match up with their words and match up with your, I guess, view of where you're going. And so there's some intentionality kind of about that. And if any one of those is off consistently, one time it's not that big of a deal. But if they go off, then there should be a repair. There should be some sort of from their end, taking responsibility for it, and let's get into common ground from that piece. So, I think you definitely have to have boundaries about it. I hear a lot of really terrible stories, and so I don't watch the news. I make that a very intentional decision. I also don't read anything on Oprah's book list because every single one of her really wonderful books that she picks out has some kind of sexual abuse or, some kind of huge, humongous trauma. And I just can't do it. I just already have enough of those negative stories. Again, I'm trying to always focus on the bridge towards more healing and more happiness. So when I'm in my downtime, I need to limit the amount of details of trauma that come in and just be able to, I literally have to kind of sometimes force myself to just sit outside and listen to the birds. Because I'm like in this, I've got to work and I've got to fix stuff kind of mode that you get in as a result of being like in trauma, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. I get into the fight often. And so I have to go and unhook that. And so I think that you just have to be really aware of the people that are around you. And that's not to say that you judge them or you label them, but maybe you don't let it in. Maybe you don't go to them for advice, or in that moment. So like with my daughter, when she was coming back, there was a piece of me that was like, I'm not letting that in, what she's saying, right? I'm going to filter it.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a really strong positive identity for yourself, then that filter is going to let in whatever the negative belief is about yourself. And that's when people get wounded over and over again.
And I think that goes back, as I'm listening to you, so much to the identity piece. I know one of the things specific to what you were saying, Jordan, is when, for me, when my security is low and I'm pretty insecure, then I'm looking to you for my security.
Right.
So, for example, like, church stuff. Hey, did you like the sermon? Did you like it? Did you like it? What part did you like?
Right.
Did you really like the whole experience? Like, did you tell somebody? And I'm saying that not because I'm honestly seeking to improve. I'm saying that to go, add to my security.
Right.
Help me with my security. The danger that I learned, in the early years in North Point and then discovered through counseling is that because of that piece of my identity was not in place, that I was inviting a lot of junk and a lot of broken feedback into my life and into North Point because I was so hungry for approval. I was so thirsty for security. And that was my identity. Versus the other piece of that is to be able to be secure enough, like you were talking about in the car with your daughter, to be able to see them from a place of benevolence.
Right.
To see like that's the broken piece of them, and to go they're saying something. They're trying to express something, and they just may not be able to.
Let's be clear. I'm not a saint here. In the
Sure.
car, I was gripping and breathing hard, and that's all I could think was that I'm just not going to respond. I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to respond until I got to that place.
Sure.
So it's not like you're always like, oh, this wonderful, loving child that's over here. So let me just be clear.
Thank you. There's the humanity piece of us right there. Oh, yeah. And I think all of this is just always in process. It's like every day. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why, the concept of reading the scriptures on a consistent basis is not because, you must dogmatically, legalistically do this. It's your Father who's just telling you who you are and how much he's for you and how much he loves you. And the scriptures that say, set your heart and mind on things above. That's good stuff. Whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is true, think about those things. There's so much more you could let in, but don't think about those things. Think about the things that your Father has for you. And I think that habit is part of that. It's just a great reminder to go, God, thank you for that. Whatever he gives you that morning through the scriptures, and that's part of it. Yeah. And just, securing up our identity or helping us take a step with that. So when it comes to listening, is there anything like the most practical, like kind of 101 advice to go, here's how, if we're all going to take a step and become better listeners, especially in times of tension or especially with people who may disagree, but is there anything you would just go like, here's some practical steps? And you've given a lot, so not to say that you have it, but any just how we become a better listener, practically speaking?
Yeah. I think the first step is to know your story and to unhook it so that you can throw out any of the negative stuff and be grounded in something that's positive. I think being able to calm down your body and not reacting, like pausing, take a moment to pause and not react until you've got that split screen really calmly, clearly on. And then also, I think we talked about this in the parenting Zoom that I did for North Point a couple of weeks ago. This piece of like repairing is really important. So a lot of times, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and so I get wrapped up sometimes, and I've got to do everything perfectly every time. And the reality is that healthy attachment is a third of the time really feeling connected to somebody, and a third of the time being rupture. Right? We're in arguments, or we are feeling disconnected from each other, or distant, or whatever. And then a third of the time is repair. So we don't have to be constantly feeling close or constantly feeling like we're on the same page to be doing it right.
That's really good.
Yeah, and I think about that in terms of my spiritual journey also, right? That there's going to be times when it's going to be like, oh yes, I'm walking outside and I can feel God's presence, and then there's other times when I'm like, what is going on here? And then that repair, that let me go back to the Bible, or let me go back to to prayer, or let me go back into church. Let me just sit in church, even though I'm feeling in conflict, and see where it leads me, and being open to that. And so, I think in conversations, that piece, that repair piece, is really important. And oftentimes with loved ones, especially with kids, it's physical. So if you can't get on the same page with your kiddos in terms of like what the rule is and whether you were right as a parent and they were wrong, which is always the case in my house, you can, come closer through touch and do that repair work that way. And then maybe you can talk it out.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of those things. Know your story. Do what you need to do to be able to calm yourself down and take that moment, and then be willing to do a repair. Kind of circle back.
That's awesome. That's got to be so
that's so
freeing for
helpful.
people to hear that lens that you just gave too, whether relationally or spiritually. I like that analogy also, to be like, kind of the conflict avoidance. If something is wrong, then we're wrong, and be like, no, that's relationship. That's lean in. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and you've just normalized something. I think, so many people, starting with me, would say like, hey, if we're in a third of that, which is the tension moment, oh, that's terrible, I shouldn't be here.
Right.
Or, the repair, gosh, we should be. And so oftentimes we think it should be utopia, like, 24/7. And just normalizing the fact that healthy relationships is a third. I think that's really, really helpful. Man, that's great.
Great.
Thank you. I'm going to walk away and just take some notes and go home, talk to Jill. Babe, have you heard of the third? That kind of thing. Well, any last things that you would just offer as we wrap up in terms of to add to the conversation about listening and et cetera?
Yeah, I think if you can just do one thing, it's allowing yourself to believe the best in yourself and believe the best in other people. If you come from that place, you're going to be able to work through all of these things, and ultimately that's the important piece. That's where you can connect. If you get into that's a bad person, or that's a bad belief, or whatever, it just is going to keep you from being able to listen and get together. So, in this age of politics being so heated, if we can just have conversations that are based on that, and know that everybody's doing the best that they can, and everybody is coming from a place of really trying to be their best person, then we'll be so far down the road in a positive way.
We'll actually make a difference. We
Yeah.
can move forward that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Traci, thank you so much for just this time. Your time is so valuable, and what you're doing, for real. I hope you can receive the fact that I do believe there's an aspect of what you do that's really pastoring people, loving people to a place to find who they are in Christ and find who they really are, that they are made in the image of God. They're a son or daughter of God, and you're helping people restore their stories and find healing, and that's awesome. Thank you for the time today. Jordan, thank you for Sunday's message. Again, I think it was the best one ever. And I think you did a really, really good job. And I just think, it's just helpful for all of us to take a step and become better listeners. I think that's how we grow in our relationship with Christ and grow in our relationship with one another. So thank you, guys. And hey, this upcoming week, we have a really special message that I'm going to be talking about something that we are made for. And so I can't wait to talk about that and what that is. And it really has to do a lot with what we're talking about today. So that's coming up this next Sunday.
Yeah. There's another opportunity for people to connect with Traci coming
Oh,
up
yeah.
too, right? We have
Yeah.
a
You're
Zoom
doing
call come in.
a meetup group on August 10th at 7:30.
Yep.
And so real quick,
PM.
PM. That's good. Because if somebody's jumping on there at AM, no one's going to be there.
Oh, well, I would be there. I'm actually an
Okay.
early bird, so they're going to have to forgive me for being
Yeah.
a little slower and dim-witted, but it'll
Yeah.
be fine. It'll be good.
Okay. So August 10th, 7:30, Zoom call.
Yeah.
It's going to be on our meetup page. And that's just going to help people really take this conversation we've had today a little
Yeah.
bit further. And wherever they're at, if they're stuck, you're going to try to help them take some steps.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for, is just a conversation for, what's getting in the way and how can we iron that out and help people take maybe some concrete things back into their relationship so they can do a little bit better job at listening.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you again.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for having this combo, and I hope you have a great week.
Thanks. You
See
too.
ya.